The morning sun crept through the oceanfront windows of the Cain estate, spilling soft gold across the marble floor. The air still smelled faintly of sea salt, expensive cologne and something else, warmth, fleeting and fragile, like the echo of a dream. Carnelian Monroe stirred beneath silk sheets that didn't belong to her. Her skin burned with memory before her mind caught up. The whisper of his breath against her neck, the tremor in his hands when he'd finally let himself touch her. And now, silence. She sat up slowly, the oversized shirt slipping from her shoulder, Damian's shirt. The fabric still carried the scent of him, cedar, smoke, restraint. It was the only trace he'd left behind. Her gaze fell to the nightstand, where a folded piece of paper lay beneath his watch. Her heartbeat faltered as she reached for it. "You are free now. Forget me, that was all." 4 words. Clean, final, cruelly elegant. Carnelian's hand trembled. A sharp laugh escaped her throat, though it didn't sound like her own. Forget him? As if the body could forget fire. As if she could erase the man who had been both her guardian and her forbidden gravity for half her life. She pushed the sheet away, stood, and crossed the room. Her bare feet sank into the plush carpet, still warm where he'd once stood. The mirror caught her reflection, tangled hair, flushed skin, eyes rimmed red from tears she hadn't realized she'd cried. For the first time, she saw herself as someone else might, no longer the girl Damian Cain had rescued from the ashes 5 years ago, but a woman who had just crossed a line she could never uncross. Outside, the Pacific shimmered cold and endless, the sound of the waves used to calm her. Today it sounded like a warning. She walked to the balcony. The morning breeze carried the scent of rain, the cry of distant gulls, and the faint hum of the city below. Carmel stretched out before her, postcard perfect, painfully indifferent. She gripped the railing until her knuckles whitened. "You are free now." The words burned in her mind. Free from what? From him? From guilt? From the strange, tethering affection that had defined every quiet corner of her life since 13. Freedom had never felt so much like exile. A knock echoed faintly through the hall. She startled, half hoping, half fearing. But it was only Mrs. Alcott, the old housekeeper, calling softly through the door. "Miss Carnelian?" "Mr. Cain left early for San Francisco. He asked that you have breakfast brought to your room." Of course he did. Even in absence he controlled the details. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady but thin. Mrs. Alcott hesitated. "Are you all right, dear?" Carnelian forced a smile the woman couldn't see. "I'm fine." The door shut gently and the silence returned. She turned back to the room, every inch of it immaculate, deliberate, curated. Damian's world had always been like that. Cold precision, hiding something restless underneath. She'd spent years trying to understand him. The man who never raised his voice, never smiled fully, never looked at her too long. Until last night. Now she knew what it was like when he stopped holding back, and that knowledge felt like both a gift and a curse. She walked toward the piano at the corner of the room. Her fingers brushed over the keys, pressing one gently. The note echoed softly, haunting, incomplete. It reminded her of him. For years, Damian had been both protector and prisoner of his own silence. He'd built walls of glass and logic to keep her, and himself, safe. But last night, those walls shattered, and she had helped him break them. Carnelian sank into the piano bench, her gaze drifting toward the waves again. Her mind replayed the look in his eyes when he'd whispered her name. Not Miss Monroe, not child, but Ara, the name he only used when his voice softened. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed to hear it until now. The sound of the ocean seemed to rise, drowning her thoughts. Beneath it, she could almost hear his words again, low, hesitant, edged with sorrow. "This is wrong, Ara. You deserve more than me." But she had only smiled, trembling, and said the truth she'd buried for years. "You're all I've ever wanted." The moment had burned, fierce and fleeting. And now it was gone. She stood, walked back to the nightstand, and stared at the folded note once more. Then, with slow defiance, she tore it into 4 perfect pieces and let them scatter onto the floor like snow. Forget him? She couldn't, because love, once ignited, didn't fade. It consumed. As the pieces fluttered to the ground, the clock struck 9. Somewhere beyond those glass walls, Damian Cain was likely already in his penthouse office, immaculate in a dark suit, pretending last night never happened, pretending she was still just his ward, a girl to protect, not a woman to remember, but he would remember, so would she, and though she didn't yet know it, that single night, and that single lie of freedom, would set fire to everything they'd ever built. The memory came to her like smoke, thick, suffocating, impossible to escape. Even 5 years later, the scent of burning pine still lingered in her mind. She was 13 the night the fire devoured everything. The Monroe house, once filled with laughter and light, had turned into a furnace of screams. Carnelian remembered waking to the sound of glass shattering, her mother's voice shouting her name, the choking weight of heat pressing down on her lungs. When she stumbled out into the cold air, the world had already ended. She'd stood barefoot in the snow, staring at the flames as they ate through her home, her parents trapped inside, their silhouettes flickering like ghosts behind the windows. Someone had pulled her back, just as the roof collapsed, and after that there was only noise, sirens shouting, the bitter sting of smoke in her throat. The next morning, she woke up in the hospital, her hair smelling of ash. They told her she was the only survivor. And then he came, Damian Cain, tall, sharp-edged, and disturbingly calm. He was 33 then, already a name in the business world, the silent partner in her father's software company. His arrival drew whispers through the sterile hospital halls. He didn't comfort her. He didn't cry. He simply stood at the edge of her bed, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. "Carnelian," he said, finally. His voice was low, measured, almost too gentle. "Your parents trusted me. Until you come of age, you'll stay under my guardianship." She blinked at him through swollen eyes. "Why you?" For a moment something flickered in his gaze. Regret, maybe, or guilt. Then it was gone. "Because I owe them," he said simply. "And because you have no one else." It was the first truth she ever heard from him. Or so she thought. Within a week, she was taken from the hospital to the Cain estate, a sprawling glass and stone mansion overlooking the Pacific. From the outside, it looked like paradise, white walls, quiet gardens, and the endless sound of waves crashing below. But to a child who'd lost everything, it was only silence made solid. The staff treated her with distant politeness. Damian rarely spoke. Meals were formal, quiet affairs at a long dining table that could have seated 20. The only sound was the clink of silver against porcelain. At first, she tried to talk about school, her parents, the things she used to love, but he always answered in short, practical sentences. "Eat more. Finish your homework. Don't wander outside after dark." He wasn't cruel. He was precise. Like everything in his life had to be calculated, controlled, contained. Still he was there. Every morning she saw him leave for work in his tailored suits. Every evening he came home after sunset, his tie loosened, his eyes tired but alert. She'd watch him from the staircase, wondering what kind of man carried so much silence inside. Once, when she asked him about the fire, his jaw tightened. "It's over," he said. "Don't look back." but she couldn't help it. The past was all she had. In the first year, nightmares visited her nightly, her father's hand slipping from hers, her mother's voice calling out through smoke. Sometimes she'd wake up screaming, and always, without fail, Damian would appear in her doorway, expression unreadable, but eyes dark with something she couldn't name. He never said a word. He'd just stand there until she calmed down, then quietly close the door. It wasn't affection. It was something heavier. A kind of guilt that clung to the air around him. By the time she turned 15, the silence had become their language. He was the only constant in her life, a distant figure in crisp suits, pacing through phone calls and contracts, but somehow always within reach. She learned the rhythm of his world, the sound of his car returning at night, the faint piano music that drifted from his office when he thought no one was listening, the way he stood by the window during storms, his hand curled into a fist behind his back. Carnelian grew curious. Who was he when no one was watching? Why did he look at her sometimes, just for a heartbeat, like he was remembering something painful? Once she asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Lyle, about him. The woman hesitated. "Mr. Cain doesn't like people prying, dear." "But your father." He and Mr. Cain were close. Very close. How close? Mrs. Lyle's gaze softened. Close enough that your father trusted him with everything, everything. The word echoed through her for years. When she turned 16, Damian began homeschooling her with private tutors. "Public school will only distract you," he'd said. "You need focus." It wasn't a request. He made her study literature, logic, and philosophy. Subjects that teach you to think clearly, Zadie, as he called them. Sometimes he'd join her lessons, correcting her essays with precise, slanted handwriting, and sometimes she'd catch him watching her. Not inappropriately, but intently, like she was something fragile he couldn't afford to touch. She didn't know when admiration became longing. Maybe it started the day he smiled, truly smiled, for the first time. It was small, almost accidental, when she quoted a line from Dante and he murmured, "Your father used to say that too." That was the first time he said her father's name in years, and it felt like sunlight cracking through stone. From then on, the walls began to shift. Not crumble, but soften. He started letting her play piano in the evenings, listened when she read aloud from her favorite books, even shared small pieces of himself. He told her he'd grown up in London, that his mother died young, and that his father was a man he didn't wish to discuss. She didn't press, but she memorized every word, and deep down, she started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the fire that had taken her family had ignited something else too. A bond that neither of them could name, yet neither could escape. Time passed differently in the Cain mansion, as if the air itself refused to move too fast. Days blurred into each other, marked only by the sound of the ocean and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. By the time Carnelian turned 17, she had learned to live within that silence. Her world had narrowed down to the waves, the books Damian left for her to read, and the rare moments when he would look up from his work long enough to say something that mattered. He had become a quiet constant, her compass, her prison, and, in ways she didn't want to admit, her obsession. Damian was a man built from discipline. Every movement was deliberate, every word measured. He never raised his voice, never lost control. Even when the world outside whispered about him, the ruthless businessman, the cold genius who built an empire from nothing, she knew that wasn't the full truth because she'd seen him differently. She'd seen the crease between his brows when he thought no one noticed, the way his shoulders tensed when someone mentioned the fire, the loneliness that lived in his eyes when he walked through the halls at night. Sometimes she wondered if he blamed himself for saving her. There were moments, rare, fragile, when the walls between them cracked. One rainy afternoon, she was playing the piano in the music room, the same song her mother used to hum while cooking. When she hit the last note, she heard clapping behind her. "You've improved," Damian said, his voice soft but steady. She turned, startled. "You were listening?" He shrugged slightly. "I always listen." For a moment they stood in silence. The rain tapped against the windows, and the air between them felt charged, not with fear, but something else, something unnamed. "Why don't you ever smile, Damian?" she asked. He gave a short laugh, the sound almost foreign. "Because smiling is dangerous." "Dangerous?" His gaze flickered to hers. People start expecting warmth when they see it. And warmth can burn. She didn't understand then. But she would. Later that evening, she found herself in the library tracing the titles of books he'd arranged. Philosophy, ethics, psychology. The spine of one was worn. On guilt and forgiveness. When he entered, she asked quietly, "Do you ever forgive yourself for anything?" He paused in the doorway. No one truly does. They just learn to live with the weight. There was something haunting in his honesty, a kind of vulnerability that only made him more unreachable. As months slipped by, she began to change. She was no longer the frightened girl he'd rescued from the ashes. Her hair had grown longer, her posture straighter, her eyes sharper. She was becoming a woman, one shaped by grief, curiosity, and the presence of a man she wasn't supposed to love. And Damian noticed. He tried not to. God, he tried. He kept his distance, buried himself in work, extended his business trips, and avoided dinners when he could. But it didn't matter. She lingered everywhere, her laughter echoing through the halls, her voice reading poetry aloud in the garden, her scent on the piano keys, and he found her asleep in the library, her head resting on an open book. The light from the fireplace brushed her face in gold. He stood there for a long moment, torn between instinct and guilt. He reached out, not to touch her, just to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, but stopped himself an inch away. His hand trembled. Then he turned and left without a sound. Carnelian woke later, her heart pounding, without knowing why. The air in the house had shifted. Every conversation carried an undercurrent now, something that neither of them dared name. A look held too long, a word spoken too softly, the accidental brush of fingertips when passing a book. At night, she lay awake, replaying each moment until they blurred together into something dangerous and sweet. What was she to him? A responsibility? A ghost from a past he couldn't erase? Or something more? Something he refused to let himself want. One evening she found him in his office, staring at the rain through the glass walls. The light from his desk lamp drew a soft halo around him. He looked exhausted, undone in a way she'd never seen before. Without thinking, she asked, "Do you ever wish things were different?" He turned to her, his jaw tense. "Different how? That we weren't who we are?" "That I wasn't—" She hesitated, unable to say the word, "your ward." His expression softened for just a second. Then quietly, "Every day." Her breath caught. She should have left. She should have looked away. But she didn't. Damian... Her voice broke on his name. He stood then, crossing the distance between them, but stopped halfway, as if there was an invisible line drawn on the floor, one he couldn't cross without losing himself. "Go to bed." "Carnelian," he said finally, his voice low, strained. "Please." She nodded, but her eyes burned with unshed tears. That night, she dreamed of the fire again. Only this time, he was the one trapped inside, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't reach him. In the morning, when she went downstairs, he was gone. His office empty, his car missing from the driveway. He'd left for another business trip, but on his desk she found a note. It wasn't signed, but but she recognized his handwriting. Some fires never die. They just learn to burn quietly. She folded it, placed it in her pocket, and whispered to herself, "Then maybe I'll be the one to put it out." The ocean roared outside the windows of the Cain estate, a deep, endless sound that matched the storm within her. It was her 18th birthday. The day freedom was supposed to mean something, yet the mansion felt emptier than ever. No laughter, no candles, no celebration. Just rain tapping against the glass and a silence that stretched too long. She sat on the edge of her bed, the silk dress he'd gifted her still folded neatly in its box. He hadn't come home yet. He'd promised he would. As the clock neared midnight, she realized he wouldn't. The disappointment burned, not because she wanted the party, but because she wanted him. The man who had saved her life. The man who taught her discipline, strength, and restraint. The man she wasn't supposed to love. Carnelian stood, her reflection staring back at her from the mirror. Her hair cascaded over her shoulders, eyes glinting in the dim light. Eyes too old for 18. She didn't look like a child anymore. She poured herself a small glass of wine, the same bottle he always drank when working late. The first sip burned. The second one didn't. By the third, she felt a strange kind of courage. When she finally heard the sound of the front door closing downstairs, her heart stopped. He was home, barefoot. She walked down the long marble corridor, each step echoing against the walls. The air smelled faintly of rain and cologne. His cologne. Damian was in his study, still in his suit, the tie loosened, the first few buttons undone. He looked tired. The kind of tired that came from years of pretending not to feel. When he saw her standing at the doorway, something flickered in his eyes. "Carnelian," he said quietly, voice rough. "It's late." "I waited," she murmured. "You said you'd come back before midnight." He exhaled, setting his glass aside. "Work ran over." "I didn't think that I'd care." Her tone was sharp, trembling, his jaw tightened. "That you'd still be awake." Silence. "Only the rain." She took a step closer. "Do you even know what today is?" He hesitated, then nodded once. "Your birthday." She smiled, a small, broken curve of her lips. 18. "I'm not a child anymore." Something in his gaze changed. It darkened, deepened, not with desire, not yet, but with something far more dangerous, realization. "Go to bed, Ara." His voice was strained. "You've had a long day." "I can't sleep." She came closer. The dim light caught the sheen on her shoulders, the faint tremor of her breath. "Why not?" he asked, even though he already knew. "Because you're still pretending," she whispered. He froze. She moved closer until she could smell the faint scent of whiskey on his breath. Her hand brushed the edge of his desk. "You act like you don't feel anything, Damian. But you do." "I see it every time you look at me." "Stop," he said, his voice low, warning. "Why?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "Because it's wrong?" He turned away, raking a hand through his hair. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," she said, her voice trembling but defiant. "You've spent 5 years keeping me at arm's length, protecting me from the world, and from you. But I'm not that little girl anymore." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the edge of his sleeve. "I'm not asking you to love me, Damian. I just want you to stop pretending you don't." That broke him, in one motion. He caught her wrist, not roughly, but firmly, as if holding on would stop the world from spinning. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said, his voice hoarse. "I do." Their eyes met, the distance between them collapsing under years of silence and restraint. When he spoke again, his words came out like a confession. "You're the only thing I ever tried to protect. From me, from everything I am, she leaned closer. And stop trying. And before he could think, before reason could stop him, she kissed him. It was soft, tentative, but electric. The taste of rain and wine lingered between them. For a heartbeat he didn't move. Then he did. His hand came up to her face, trembling, tracing the line of her jaw. He should have pushed her away. Instead, he pulled her closer. The kiss deepened. Not desperate, but inevitable. Every emotion they'd buried, grief, guilt, longing, rose and intertwined. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This can't happen," he whispered, but it already did. Her words hung in the air like a verdict. He turned away, eyes closed. "You'll regret this," she stepped forward, her voice breaking. "No, Damian. I'll regret not knowing what it feels like to be real with you, even for one night." And that was all it took. The rest unfolded like a secret the universe had been waiting to tell. Outside, the storm grew louder, waves crashing against the shore, thunder echoing in the distance. Inside, the air was thick with the weight of choice and consequence. When morning came, sunlight spilled through the curtains, cold and unforgiving. Carnelian woke alone. On the pillow beside her was a folded note. His handwriting, sharp, elegant, controlled. "You are free now. Forget me." The words cut deeper than any goodbye could. She sat there for a long time, the sheets tangled around her, the scent of him still clinging to her skin. Freedom had never felt so much like loss. The sunlight over Carmel Bay was pale and distant, the kind that never quite warmed anything. It spilled into the bedroom through the sheer curtains, revealing the ghost of a night she wasn't sure had been real. Carnelian lay still for a long time, her eyes fixed on the empty space beside her. The pillow was cold now, the sheet creased, evidence of his absence. It wasn't a dream. She could still feel the heat of his hands, the tremor in his voice when he said her name. The moment the line between wrong and right blurred beyond recognition, and yet he was gone. On the mahogany nightstand sat a folded note, perfectly aligned, written in the same precise handwriting she'd seen on business contracts. On letters to his board, "You are free now. Forget me," she read it once. Then again, the words burned deeper with every repetition. Free. He had said it as if her love were a chain, as if he were doing her a favor by disappearing. But what kind of freedom left her gasping for air? Carnelian rose from the bed, wrapping the white sheet around her like armor. Her legs felt weak, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of everything that had changed. The air in the room still smelled of him, sandalwood and salt. She walked to the mirror. The girl reflected there was no longer the obedient ward he had raised. Her eyes were raw, her hair disheveled, her lips marked by the proof of a night she was never supposed to have. A part of her wanted to cry. Another wanted to scream. But instead she whispered, "Why did you run?" She dressed quietly, jeans, a loose sweater, the first thing she could find, and left the room. The mansion was silent. Too silent. Usually by this hour she'd hear the faint sound of the housekeeper preparing breakfast, or Damian's footsteps echoing in the hallway as he took his morning calls. But now there was only stillness. On the dining table sat a single cup of coffee, still steaming. He had made it before leaving. Her throat tightened. She sat down, staring at the untouched cup, tracing her finger along its rim. It was as if he'd wanted to say goodbye without saying it, the same way he'd lived, always controlling the story, even its ending. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Evelyn, the housekeeper who had cared for her since she was a child. "Miss Monroe, Mr. Cain left early for the city. He said he'd be gone for a while. Gone for a while? No timeline. No explanation. Just gone. Carnelian's hand trembled as she set the phone down. The walls of the house seemed to close in on her. Every painting, every polished surface reminding her of his presence and her place in it. The obedient ward. The rescued orphan. The girl he protected, molded, owned, no more. She stood and went to his study of the one room he'd never let her enter. The door was locked as always, but she remembered the spare key in the library. For years she'd respected that line. Now, after what had happened, there were no lines left to keep. The key turned with a soft click. The air inside smelled of paper, ink, and him. Everything was immaculate. Not a page out of place, not a pen uncapped. But what caught her attention was the drawer half open beneath his desk. Inside were old photographs. One of her at 13, standing awkwardly beside him at a charity gala. Another of her parents, smiling at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for Monroe Innovations, the company her father had co-founded with him. Her fingers trembled as she lifted one of the photos. Damian looked younger there, happier, his arm loosely draped over her father's shoulder. Behind the photo was a newspaper clipping. Carmel Estate. Fire leaves. 2 dead. Investigation. Ongoing. Her parents' names were printed in bold. Her breath caught. She flipped the clipping over. Faint handwriting on the back. In his pen stroke. Not an accident. Find out who ordered it. The room spun slightly. He knew. He had known something about that night. The one she'd spent 5 years trying to forget. And he had never told her. Why? Why save her only to keep her in the dark? A faint knock startled her. Evelyn peeked through the door, her kind eyes filled with concern. Miss Monroe? You all right? Carnelian hid the papers behind her back. Yes, she lied. Just organizing, Evelyn nodded slowly. You look pale, dear. Maybe some fresh air? I'll be fine. When the woman left, Carnelian locked the door again and leaned against it. Her pulse racing. The truth was somewhere in these walls. In his silence. In his guilt. In the way he couldn't meet her eyes the night before. Maybe he'd kept her close not out of love, but out of fear. Fear that she'd find out what really happened. The thought made her chest ache. She gathered the files, placed them back exactly as they were, and left the study. But as she walked down the hall, one sentence kept echoing in her mind. His note, but rewritten in her voice. You are free now. Forget me. No, she thought bitterly. I'll remember everything. The house by the cliffs had always been quiet, but tonight the silence carried weight, a silence that listened. Carnelian stood at the base of the staircase, the dim golden lights reflecting off the marble floors. Damian had been gone for weeks now, and yet his shadows seemed to linger in every corridor, every locked door, her gaze fixed on the library, a grand, double-doored chamber lined with dark oak shelves and glass cases. He had forbidden her from entering it since the day he brought her home. Some memories are better left untouched, he once told her. But now, memories were all she had left. The key she'd taken from his desk felt cold in her palm as she turned it. The lock clicked softly, like a sigh that had waited too long. The scent of old books and cedar washed over her. Inside, dust floated through beams of light like ghosts suspended in air. She moved carefully, fingers brushing along spines of books in Latin and French, Philosophiae Naturalis, Vita et Veritas. He had always surrounded himself with knowledge, but she suspected what he was hiding wasn't wisdom. It was guilt. At the far end of the room was a locked cabinet with brass handles. Its keyhole was the same design as the one she'd seen in his study. She knelt, tried the smaller key. It fit. Inside were neatly stacked folders, marked with familiar handwriting. Project Orpheus, Monroe Partnership, Cain Industries, Incident Report, Confidential Fire Recovery. Her stomach twisted. She pulled one folder out. The first page was a fire marshal's report, an old brown document describing the night that changed everything. Electrical malfunction, it read. No signs of foul play, but stapled beneath was a private memo, internal correspondence between Charles Cain and Damian Cain. She recognized the signature. Damian's, dated 2 days before the fire, Father. Monroe is threatening to withdraw from the partnership. He discovered the falsified accounts. I'm handling it. Please do nothing drastic. And another from Charles Cain, written in hurried ink. Everything must be contained. Do whatever is necessary. If we lose Monroe, the entire project collapses. Carnelian's throat closed. She flipped the next page. A faded photograph fell out. Her parents, smiling beside Damian and Charles at a ground-breaking ceremony. Her father's arm rested around Damian's shoulder, their smiles too bright to know what was coming. Her hands shook as she read the next letter. This one unsigned. Jonathan knows. He won't talk. But if the girl ever finds out, it will destroy her. The girl. Her. The air left her lungs. For 5 years, he had known something. Perhaps not the whole truth, but enough to live in guilt, enough to take her in, protect her, keep her from ever asking questions. Was that why he'd looked at her the way he did, like she was both redemption and punishment? Her knees buckled, and she sat on the floor, clutching the folder to her chest. A soft creak made her freeze. Miss Monroe? Evelyn's voice drifted through the door. Are you in here? Carnelian scrambled to gather the papers. Yes, she said quickly, too breathless. Just reading. Mr. Cain asked that this room stay closed. He's not here, she said, sharper than she meant to. Then softer. It's okay, Evelyn. Please, I just need some time. There was a pause. All right, dear. Just don't stay too long. It's getting dark. When Evelyn's footsteps faded, Carnelian exhaled. She gathered the documents, her pulse racing. The words, "Do whatever is necessary," echoed in her mind like a curse. Her entire life, her loss, her pain, her dependence on Damian, might have been the byproduct of a deal gone wrong. A decision made in the name of greed and control. And Damian had known enough to keep silent. The revelation cut deeper than betrayal. It was erasure. Every memory she had of him, his tenderness, his restraint, his silence, reshaped itself into a lie. But there was something else underneath the anger. Sorrow. Heavy and cold. 'Cause even now, even knowing this, she couldn't hate him completely. That realization terrified her most of all. She stood, clutching one photo, the 4 of them smiling, unaware of the inferno that would one day consume everything. Her thumb brushed Damian's younger face. You kept me safe, she whispered, voice trembling. But from what or from who? The ocean wind rattled the windows as if answering. Carnelian turned off the lights and locked the room behind her, but the darkness inside followed. That night, as she lay awake in her bed, she knew sleep wouldn't come. There was only one thought echoing in her head, a truth too heavy to ignore now. If love is born from guilt, does it ever stop burning? Rain had begun to fall by the time Damian returned. The wind carried the scent of the ocean and storm, slamming the glass doors open as he stepped inside, coat dripping, jaw tense. He froze when he saw her standing in the foyer, pale, trembling, and holding a folder pressed to her chest. Where were you? Her voice was barely steady. He blinked, confused by her tone. A meeting. You shouldn't be up this late. Don't, She cut him off. Don't talk to me like I'm still that girl you could tell what to do. The silence that followed was sharp. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in years, she wasn't the quiet, obedient ward he'd raised. There was fire in her now, and it terrified him. She lifted the folder and threw it onto the table between them. The pages spilled out like confessions. What is this, Damian? Her voice cracked. Tell me this isn't real. He saw the documents, the memos, the letters, the photos, and all the color drained from his face. He didn't reach for them. Didn't deny them. Instead, he whispered, "Where did you find that?" "The library," she said, her breath trembling. "The room you told me never to enter. You lied to me for years." "You said that night was an accident. No," she shouted, the word cutting through the rain. "It wasn't." "Your father wanted to silence mine. You knew something, Damian. Maybe not everything, but enough to keep me in the dark. You brought me here, raised me, controlled me. Why?" He finally looked up, eyes dark, weary. "To protect you. Protect me?" She laughed bitterly. "From what? The truth? From you?" He flinched, as if she had struck him. "Your father destroyed my family," she continued, voice shaking but relentless. "And you let me love you." He took a step forward, rain still dripping from his hair. "You don't understand." "And make me understand," she cried. "Tell me why, Damian. Tell me why you let me live under your roof, call you my guardian, and, God, why you let that night happen if all of it was built on lies." The question hung between them, a wound neither could close. He drew in a slow, ragged breath. "Because I couldn't stop loving you," she froze. "I tried," he continued, his voice hoarse. "For years I tried to keep you safe, to keep a distance. But every day I looked at you and saw what my father took from you, your childhood, your peace, and it killed me. I thought if I gave you everything, maybe it would make up for what he did." Tears blurred her vision. "You don't make up for a crime by loving its victim." "I know," he whispered, "but I didn't know how else to live with it." Lightning flashed across the room, casting his face in stark relief. Haunted, broken, human. "I didn't start that fire," he said, almost pleading. "But I knew. I found out months after it happened. I confronted him, my father. He told me to stay silent, that it would destroy the company, the family. So I did. Until the night I saw you again in that hospital bed, shaking and alone, and I couldn't walk away. I took you in because I couldn't bear to lose you too." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You took me in because you were guilty." He closed his eyes. Yes. The admission tore through her. Her knees weakened, and she gripped the edge of the table. "And all these years, every word, every look was real," he said quickly, stepping closer. "Our Carnelian, everything between us was real. You think I planned this? You think I wanted to fall in love with the daughter of the man my father wronged? You think I wanted to watch you look at me like I was your savior when all I ever was your jailer?" Her tears finally fell, silent and heavy. "Then why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered. "Because once I did," he said, voice breaking, "you'd never look at me the same way again." The storm outside raged, thunder rolling across the ocean. She took a step back, shaking her head. "You're right. I don't." The look that passed between them was unbearable, love and ruin intertwined. He didn't stop her when she turned toward the stairs. But when she reached the landing, his voice stopped her. "I never asked for your forgiveness," he said softly. "But I need you to know I would have burned everything I had to undo what he did." She didn't turn around. Her fingers gripped the railing until her knuckles went white. "I don't want you to burn for him," she whispered. "I just wanted you to tell the truth." And then she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the hallway until the only sound left was the storm and the hollow beating of his heart. Downstairs, Damian stood alone beside the open folder, the rain soaking through the edges of the paper. One photo caught his eye, the four of them before the fire. He reached out, tracing her father's face, then hers. "I'm sorry," he said to no one. Outside, the wind howled against the cliffs, carrying away the sound of his apology into the dark sea below. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered inside the Cain estate. For 2 days, silence stretched between them like an ocean. Damian barely left his study. Carnelian, pale and sleepless, stayed in her room with the folder. The truth she could no longer bury. By the 3rd morning, she packed her bag when Damian found her in the foyer, her coat already on, her hands trembling slightly. He knew before she said a word. "You're leaving," he murmured. She looked at him with eyes rimmed red, but steady. "You knew this would happen." He nodded once. "Where will you go?" "To the truth," she said simply. "I'm going to the press, to the authorities, to whoever will listen." The air froze between them. His voice dropped, quiet but dangerous. "If you do this, you'll destroy everything. My company, my name, your company was built on my parents' ashes," she interrupted. "Should have been destroyed years ago." He winced, every word cutting into him. "I'm not doing this to hurt you, Damian," she said softly. "I'm doing it because it's the only way to stop living in a lie." He stepped closer, his expression torn between love and desperation. "Ara, you think the truth will set you free, but it doesn't. It just changes the shape of the prison." She met his gaze. "Then let it change, because I'm done living in yours." For a long moment neither moved. Then he exhaled, long and slow, as if surrendering to a battle already lost. "Then do what you must," he said quietly. "But I won't let you stand alone." The following week blurred into a nightmare. Carnelian filed her statement with the district attorney's office, submitting the evidence she found, and Damian followed suit. Walking into a government building under 100 cameras, the world devoured the story. Tech titan hides link to deadly fire. Hair exposes family crimes. Cain Industries stock plummeted overnight. Board members resigned in droves. Reporters camped outside his gates like vultures waiting for the final fall. Through it all, Damian never once spoke in his defense. When asked by a journalist why he had confessed, he said only, "Because she was right." At night, he sat in the ruins of his office, the empire his father built, now hollow. Screens blinked, with numbers turning red, alerts flashing bankruptcy warnings. He barely noticed. His thoughts were somewhere else. A seaside town. A girl in a paint-stained sweater who'd once laughed over breakfast. Before everything burned again, a knock came at the door. "Mr. Cain," his assistant's voice cracked. "The Department of Justice has called. They want your statement tomorrow." He nodded absently. "Tell them I'll be there." When the man left, Damian looked around the room. On the shelf sat the old family photo again, his father, his mother, and himself, smiling in front of the mansion before the fire that destroyed another family's life. He took the frame down, studied it for a moment, then smashed it against the edge of the desk, glass scattered. The photo fell to the ground. Meanwhile, Carnelian faced her own storm. The media wanted her story. The papers called her the orphan who exposed the empire. People treated her like a hero, but inside, she felt hollow. Every word she spoke in interviews felt like salt in a wound she wasn't sure she wanted to close. One evening, she watched the news. Damian Cain leaving his building surrounded by reporters, refusing to answer questions. The headline read, "Cain admits concealment of corporate arson, faces federal investigation." She whispered to herself, "You did the right thing," but her voice trembled, because somewhere beneath the relief was grief. Not for the empire, but for the man who had finally done the right thing, even if it destroyed him. Days passed. Then weeks, the Cain estate was seized. Assets frozen. Employees scattered. Damian was called to testify in court, offering full cooperation. His lawyers told him he could save himself if he blamed his father completely, but he refused. "I'm not my father," he said. But I carried his silence. That's enough. The sentence shocked the press. Damian Cain, 2 years probation, full forfeiture of corporate holdings. He lost everything except his name, and even that was now synonymous with disgrace. Carnelian watched from the back of the courtroom. He didn't see her, but when the judge read the verdict, his eyes lifted slightly, as if sensing her presence. Their gazes met for a single second. It was enough. That night, she went back to the cliffside mansion one last time. The house was empty, stripped of its luxury. Only echoes remained. In Jonathan's old study, she found the piano he used to play, untouched for years. She sat down, brushed the dust from the keys, and began to play. The melody was one her mother used to hum, gentle, melancholic. Behind her, footsteps approached. "I didn't think you'd come back," said a familiar voice. She turned. Damian stood in the doorway, no longer the untouchable billionaire, just a man, tired, hollow, but still painfully real. "I came to say goodbye," she said quietly. He nodded, stepping closer. "I was hoping for that." The silence between them stretched again, filled with everything they couldn't fix. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Telling the truth?" He smiled faintly, sad and soft. "No, I only regret waiting this long." She blinked back tears. "You could have saved yourself." "I did," he said simply. "By letting you destroy me." Her lips trembled. "You can't keep saying things like that." He gave a small shrug. "Why not? There's nothing left to lose." Lightning flickered outside the windows, illuminating his face. Not the cold, distant man she once feared, but someone stripped bare of power. Standing on the edge of redemption, she rose slowly, crossing the room until they were inches apart. For a heartbeat, they stood still, two souls caught between love and ruin. Then she whispered, "Maybe losing everything was what we both needed." He reached out, brushing his fingers against hers, hesitant, reverent, fleeting. "Maybe," he said, "but if this is the end, I'm glad it was you who ended it." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Goodbye, Damian," he smiled faintly. "Goodbye, Ara." She walked out, leaving him standing in the dying light. The waves crashed below, and for the first time in decades, the Cain estate felt human, broken but honest. The trial was over, but the world hadn't. Finished with them, headlines filled every news channel for weeks. Cain, heir admits to decade-long cover-up. From billionaire to broken man, Damian Cain's fall from grace. And somewhere among those headlines was another name. Hers, the orphan who brought the truth to her. Light Carnelian should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt hollow each morning. Strangers sent her flowers, letters of gratitude, and requests for interviews. "You're an inspiration," they said. But she didn't feel like one. She was just a girl who'd set fire to everything, and was now standing alone in the ashes. The coastal mansion had been sold off by the state. The fortune dismantled, the servants gone. In its place, Damian now lived in a small cottage near the cliffs, the same cliffs where she had once watched the ocean from her bedroom window, dreaming of escape. She saw him one last time the day before the sentencing was finalized. He had called her. The message was short. "Meet me where it all began." The wind howled across the cliffs when she arrived. Damian stood at the edge, hair tousled, the ocean crashing below. The air smelled of salt and rain. She stopped several feet away. "You shouldn't be here." "The press," he turned, his eyes quiet. Let them look. They've already taken everything else. She wanted to be angry, to remind him that he'd earned this. But when she saw the exhaustion in his face, the weight in his shoulders, the words died in her throat. He was no longer the man she'd once hated, nor the savior she'd once loved. He was simply human. I came to ask you something, he said, voice low. When it's over, when I've lost it all, Widom, what will you do? She hesitated. Live, he smiled faintly, as if that answer was both painful and perfect. Good, I hoped you'd say that. Silence stretched between them, filled with wind and waves. Then he added, I want you to know. I don't regret you. Her breath caught. He looked away, eyes dark with sorrow. Every day I lied. I told myself it was to protect you. But the truth is, I was protecting myself from losing you. From the guilt. From everything I'd done. Her voice trembled. You can't fix what's broken by loving it, Damian. I know, he said softly, but I can love it honestly now. Something inside her cracked, a tenderness she'd buried under anger and fear. She took a step closer. You'll be leaving soon, won't you? He nodded. They call it probation, but it's exile in another name. Where will you go? Somewhere quiet, he said. A place where no one knows my name, she swallowed hard. And what do you want from me? He hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing. Just this, the truth between us. No more lies. No more debts. She felt the sting of tears. You make it sound so easy. It isn't, he said, but it's the only thing left that's real. They stood there as the sky began to darken. The horizon glowed faintly orange, waves rising like the echo of their past. Violent, beautiful, unrelenting. For a moment, she wanted to reach out, to hold him one last time, to forget the wreckage between them. But she couldn't. Love, she realized, wasn't about clinging to what hurt. It was about letting go with grace. I wish we'd met differently, she whispered. He looked at her, eyes glassy with unshed tears. Maybe then I wouldn't have fallen so completely. A tear slipped down her cheek. Goodbye, Damian. He took a small step forward, then stopped. A hesitation that carried the weight of everything they'd been. Goodbye. Ara. The wind carried her name between them like a prayer. She turned, walking back up the cliffside path, never looking back. Days later, the news reported Damian Cain's official resignation from all corporate titles. He had forfeited everything to the victims' trust fund, including the mansion, the company, and what remained of his inheritance. He vanished from the public eye soon after. Rumors said he'd left for the coast of Oregon, working quietly for a marine conservation project under another name. Carnelian didn't chase after him. She'd made her choice, to rebuild her life on her own terms. But sometimes, late at night, she would hear the sound of the sea and wonder if he could hear it too. Months passed. The world moved on, forgetting the scandal that had once consumed it. One afternoon, she sat by her window, sketching the horizon, the same view she'd seen from the Cain estate years ago. Only now she saw it differently. It wasn't a symbol of captivity anymore, but of freedom. A soft knock echoed at her door. The mailman handed her an envelope, unmarked, save for her name in neat handwriting. Inside was a small photograph. It was a beach. Grey waves, a weathered pier, and a man standing alone at the edge of the water. No words, no address, just a single note on the back. Still listening, she smiled through her tears. Love didn't always end in reunion, she thought sometimes. It ended in understanding, and that too was enough. The sea was different here, softer, quieter, as if it knew how to keep secrets. Months had passed since the trial, since the last time Carnelian saw Damian standing on the cliffs, wind tearing at his coat. The chaos had faded, like a storm finally spent. Newspapers had found new scandals, new faces to dissect. The name Cain no longer filled every headline, and for the first time in her life, she didn't belong to a tragedy. The small coastal cottage had belonged to her grandfather, a painter who'd lived and died before she was born. It was modest, with chipped white walls, salt-streaked windows, and a garden that smelled of lavender and seaweed. Every morning she opened the shutters and let the sunlight spill in. The air smelled of paint and coffee. Her easel stood by the window, always half finished with some canvas that captured the sea in different moods. Stormy, peaceful, lonely. Children from the nearby village came by for her art classes. They were noisy, messy, and full of laughter. When they called her Miss Monroe, she always smiled. It was the first time that name had felt fully hers. In the evenings, she walked along the sand barefoot, the tide licking at her ankles. Sometimes she'd collect smooth pebbles, arranging them in little patterns, things only she would understand. The quiet no longer frightened her. It was her sanctuary now. One evening, as the sun began to lower, a molten gold horizon melting into the sea, she sat on the porch, sipping tea and sketching the light. The air was cool, the gulls wheeling lazily overhead. That was when she heard footsteps on the gravel path. Slow, hesitant, familiar. Her hand froze mid-line. She looked up, and there he was, Damian Cain, standing at the gate, but not the man she remembered. He was thinner, the sharpness of wealth and pride washed away. His clothes were simple, a faded grey sweater, jeans, a jacket too light for the weather. His hair had grown longer, brushed back in careless waves. The air around him was no longer charged with power, just quiet, fragile humanity. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. The sound of waves filled the silence between them. Finally, he said softly, "May I come in?" She hesitated, then nodded. "You always did what you wanted anyway." He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "Not anymore." Inside, he looked around, at the canvases leaning against the walls, the jars of paintbrushes, the life she'd built. "This suits you," he said quietly. "The light, the sea, it's peaceful," she replied, setting her sketchbook down. "No noise." "No lies," he nodded slowly. "That's what you wanted, isn't it?" "Peace." She studied him carefully. "Why are you here, Damian?" He took a breath, his voice low and even. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he said. "I know that's not mine to ask for." "Then what do you want?" He met her eyes. No arrogance, no defense, only sincerity. "I just wanted to make sure you're living the life you used to talk about, the one you deserved." Something in her chest tightened. She thought of that night months ago, the wind on the cliffs, when he'd asked what she would do after it all. "Live," she'd said, and she had. "I am," she said softly. "More than I ever thought I could," he smiled faintly. "Good. That's all I needed to know." He turned to leave, and for a moment she almost let him go. But then, "Damian." He stopped, looking back. She took a step forward. "Are you happy?" His answer came after a pause. "I'm learning how to be." "I think that counts." She gave a small smile, bittersweet but true. "That does." The wind carried the faint smell of salt and paint between them. He looked around once more, as if memorizing every detail, her cottage, the sound of her laughter from earlier, the life that no longer needed him. Then he said quietly, "You once said love shouldn't be a cage." I didn't understand it then. I do now. She felt tears prick at her eyes, but didn't look away. "Maybe someday we'll both be free enough to love again. In the right way." "Maybe," he whispered. They stood there for another moment, two people who had been fire and ruin, now learning what it meant to be gentle. Then he nodded once. Not a goodbye, but an acknowledgement. When he walked down the path and disappeared behind the dunes, the air felt strangely lighter. Carnelian stayed on the porch until the sun sank completely, the sky turning indigo. She closed her sketchbook, took a deep breath, and smiled. This was her life now. Not borrowed, not built from ashes, but chosen. And somewhere out there, she hoped he had found the same peace. The sun was sinking low over the lake, laying a golden shimmer across the rippling surface. Carnelian sat on the worn wooden bench near the edge, a sketchbook on her lap, pencil resting idle between her fingers. The light danced across the water, soft and forgiving, the kind of light that made everything, even the past, seem gentler. Footsteps approached from behind. Slow. Familiar. She didn't turn around right away. Somehow, she already knew. When Damian sat beside her, neither spoke. The world had quieted down to the hush of waves against the shore, the song of birds returning home, the distant whisper of wind threading through pine. For a long while, they just watched the light fade together. "It's beautiful here," he said finally, his voice low and rough like he hadn't used it in days. "It always is," she replied, "especially when the world stops trying to fix you." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "You sound at peace." "I am," she said. "Or learning to be," he nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. His reflection wavered on the surface of the water. Older, quieter, no longer the untouchable man of power. After a pause, he said softly, "Love doesn't always mean holding on." She turned to him. The golden light brushed against his face, catching the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. Not from age, but from all the things he had carried. "I know," she whispered, "but I'm not afraid anymore." Their eyes met, steady, unguarded. No declarations, no apologies. Just truth. The silence between them felt full, not empty. It carried the weight of all that had been said and all that no longer needed to be. He picked up a small pebble and tossed it into the water. Ripples spread outward, widening and softening until the surface calmed again. "That's us, isn't it?" he murmured. "The ripples. They fade, but the water, it's still the same," she smiled faintly. "Except now it's clearer." He looked at her then, really looked. The woman beside him was no longer the frightened girl in the shadow of his guilt. She was free, whole, her light, her own, and in that realization, he found peace. "I used to think I could save you," he said, quietly. "But I was wrong." "You were the one who saved me from myself." Carnelian's hand brushed lightly against his, a brief, tender touch that said everything words couldn't. "No one saves anyone," she said. "We just walk each other to the edge of the light." He drew a shaky breath and nodded. "And I'm glad I walked that far with you." The sun slipped lower, the sky awash in colors, rose, amber, violet. A soft wind stirred the water, carrying the faint scent of pine and salt. Neither of them moved to stand. There was no rush, no ending to define. He glanced at her sketchbook. On the page, half finished, was a sketch of the lake. Two small silhouettes sitting by the water's edge. He smiled. "Will you finish it?" "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe I'll leave it like this. Some moments don't need to be completed." He nodded again, understanding. When he finally rose to leave, she didn't stop him. He walked a few steps, then turned back. "Take care, Carnelian. You too." Damian, the air shimmered between them, heavy with unsaid things, gratitude, forgiveness, love. All woven into silence as he disappeared along the path. She watched until his figure melted into the trees. Then she looked back at the lake, at the golden line where the sun met the water. For the first time in years, she didn't feel torn between past and future, just whole. She picked up her pencil and drew one last line on the page, the horizon, and under her breath, She whispered, "Some stories don't end. They just find the light." The lake reflected the last of the sunset, rippling softly, like the quiet heartbeat of a world that had finally forgiven itself.